The envelope on my desk is labeled in my own handwriting, and the handwriting is steadier than my hand is now, which tells you how long it has been sitting in the drawer. Inside it, there is a strip of cedar railing, about 11 inches long. I cut it myself from the upstream handrail of a footbridge in the Cedar Hollow section of Greywater National Forest. The wood is gray on the outside the way old cedar goes gray, but if you turn it over, you can see a band running across it, a darker stain, about 6 inches up from where the deck boards would have met it. That band is a high water mark. Anybody who has worked around rivers knows what it is on sight. It is the line where moving water sat against the wood long enough to leave its color behind. The bridge that railing came from crossed a dry ravine, not a seasonal creek, not a drainage that runs in spring and goes quiet in August. Dry, dust on the rocks. I stood in the bottom of that ravine, and the dust came up around my boots like flour. There was no river on any modern map within 3 miles of that bridge. There was no creek, no culvert, no flood channel, no water table high enough to feed a stream that size. There was nothing under that bridge but rock and old needles and air. And yet a search team I was part of found fresh river weed wrapped around the upstream support, the green still in it. We found a hiker's boot wedged up under the planks, soaked through, cold to the touch, cold the way water that has come off snow is cold, in the middle of a dry summer. The young woman who lost that boot crossed the bridge with 3 other people. All 4 of them told me, separately, that the bridge spanned a deep, fast, black river, and that the one who is gone stopped halfway across and stepped toward the sound of it. We classified the case as misnavigation. We said she most likely became disoriented and went into Maddox Creek, which is the nearest mapped water, almost 3 miles east. I signed off on that. I helped write it. And I took this one piece of railing out of the evidence inventory before it was logged, and I have kept it in a drawer for a long time now, because the band of stain on it has no business existing, and I could not put it in a file where someone might ask me to explain it. I am telling this now because 2 months ago a current trail report came across to me, forwarded by a man who still works the district and knows I keep an interest in that section. The report lists the Cedar Hollow footbridge as closed. The reason given is flood damage. There has been no flood. There is no river to flood. And I am too old now to keep pretending I do not understand what that closure means. So let me go back to the start of it, the way it actually happened, not the way the paper says. It was the 3rd week of August. I had been retired from active fire lookout for years by then, and was doing search and rescue out of the Eastern District, which mostly meant I was the old man who knew the country, and could read the ground, and could keep a family calm on the phone, while younger people did the walking. That suited me. I want to be honest that I liked the work. There is a clean feeling in it that I did not find in much else. The call came in on a Sunday evening. A woman named Carol Devereaux phoned the ranger station to say her daughter and 3 friends had not come out of a backcountry loop they were supposed to finish that afternoon. They had a permit, which helped, because it meant we had a trip plan on file. 4 hikers, 3 nights. A loop that started at the Birch Landing trailhead, ran up the ridge, came down across the lake chain, and closed back through Cedar Hollow. They were due back at their cars by 2 in the afternoon. By 7, nobody had called, nobody had answered a text, and Carol Devereaux had driven to the trailhead herself and seen the cars still parked there. That last part is what moved it from a worried mother to a real call. People are late all the time. Cars that are still at the trailhead at dusk, on the day a party was due out, are a different thing. The missing party was 4 young adults, late 20s, all from down in the valley towns. The permit holder, the one who had organized it, was a man named Daniel Reyes, 31, an engineer who hiked a lot and planned things down to the ounce. The kind of man who laminates his maps. With him were 3 others. One was Carol Devereaux's daughter, Maya Devereaux, 28. One was a woman named Priya Anand, 30, who I would later learn had never done a multi-day trip before and had nearly backed out twice. And one was a man named Cole Whitaker. No, let me get that right. Whitaker. Cole Whitaker, 29, who carried a real camera, the kind with a strap and a heavy lens, and who photographed everything. Maya Devereaux is the one who is gone. I did not know any of that the first night. The first night I knew 4 names, 4 ages, a permit, a loop, and a trip plan that said they should have been standing in a gravel lot eating gas station sandwiches 5 hours earlier. That is enough to start. The incident commander that week was a woman named Sharon Bell. I had worked with Sharon for years, and I trusted her, which I say up front, because some of what I have to tell you puts her in a hard light, and she does not deserve to be remembered as a fool. She was the opposite of a fool. She made the calls a careful person makes with the information in front of her. That is exactly the problem, but it is not a fault. We opened it as an overdue party search, rather than a full emergency that first night, because that is correct procedure. You confirm the cars, you confirm the trip plan, you do a trailhead check, you call the contacts. You do not throw 40 people into black timber at 10 at night for a party that might walk out at first light embarrassed and fine. So that night, we did the quiet work. I drove out to Birch Landing myself, because I wanted to put my own eyes on the cars. There were 2 vehicles, a small gray hatchback and an older truck, both with valley plates, both cold. I put my hand on the hoods out of habit. Cold metal, heavy dew, already forming. They had been there since at least the previous day. There was a permit copy on the dash of the truck, which is the kind of thing Daniel Reyes would do, and a trail map folded to the loop. I wrote down the mileage on both odometers, and I walked the first quarter mile of the trail with a light, calling, not expecting an answer, and not getting one. The trailhead register had their entry from 3 days earlier, 4 names in Daniel's neat block printing, with the planned loop and the expected exit date. No exit entry. People forget to sign out all the time, so that meant little by itself. but it sat with the cold hoods and the still cars, and made a shape I did not like. I want to describe the loop, because the geography matters more than anything else in this whole account. The trail went up first, climbing the ridge through birch and then pine, gaining maybe 2,000 feet over the first day, to a high camp near a string of small tarns. The second day ran the ridge and dropped down the far side to the Black Lakes, the chain we just call the Greywater Lakes. Deep, cold water that never warms, even in August. The third day, the last day, came back west, through lower country, and the last few miles, before the trailhead ran through Cedar Hollow. Cedar Hollow is a long, shallow draw, full of old cedar, dark even at noon, and the trail through it crosses one ravine on the footbridge I have been describing. That bridge was the last real feature on the loop, before the trail climbed gently back to Birch Landing. If you were walking the loop the way they were, the bridge would have come near the end of your last day, when you were tired and thinking about your car and a hot meal, when your attention was used up. That detail did not mean anything to me the first night. I only understood it later, how much it mattered that the bridge came at the end, when people are not looking hard at anything. By dawn Monday, we had a hasty team ready. A hasty team is exactly what it sounds like. A small, fast group sent down the most likely route to find people who are probably just slow or hurt, not lost. The most likely route, working backward from the cars, was the last day's trail. So the plan was to send the hasty team in from Birch Landing, down through Cedar Hollow, and up the lower trail, covering the ground the party would have walked last. I went with that team because I knew the ground, and because Sharon wanted someone on it who could read sign. We found the first of them at about 9 in the morning, less than 2 miles in, sitting against a tree, just off the trail, on the Cedar Hollow side of the bridge. It was Priya Anand. She was the inexperienced one, and she was in rough shape, dehydrated, cold despite the warming day. One ankle swollen up like a melon inside her boot, which she had not taken off because she was afraid she would not get it back on. She had been there, by her account, since the previous afternoon. She had not been able to walk on the ankle, and the others had gone ahead to get help, and then no help had come, and she had spent the night alone against that tree, listening to the woods. The first thing she said to me, before she said anything about her ankle or the others or water, the first thing out of her mouth when she understood I was real and there to help, was, "Is the river down? Can you get across?" I told her there was no river. I said it the way you say, an easy, true thing to a frightened person, to settle them. I said, "There's no river here. You're all right. The trail's dry." She looked at me like I had said something cruel. She said, "We crossed it yesterday, on the bridge. It was so loud. And then she started to cry, the dry hitching kind of crying, from someone who does not have enough water in them for proper tears. I put that down at the time to exposure. People who have spent a cold night alone and dehydrated say things. The mind does strange work when the body is starved of water and sleep. I have heard people insist on whole conversations that never happened, swear to faces of family members standing in the trees. So I filed her river in that category, and got her warm, and got fluids into her, and got the medics moving up to carry her out. But I noticed, because noticing is what I am, that her boots were wet, not damp from dew. The leather was dark with water halfway up, and there was a tide line of fine silt around the welt, the kind of pale silt that settles out of moving water, and I had walked the same dry trail she had supposedly walked, and my boots were gray with dust. I did not say anything about the boots. I should have logged them right then. I did not. That is the first small thing I let go, and I wanted on this record that I let it go. While the medics worked on Priya, I asked her, gently, where the others were. She said Daniel and Cole had gone ahead for help. And Maya? I asked. Where is Maya? And Priya stopped and got a look. I have seen on people who are about to tell you something they have already decided you will not believe. She said, Maya didn't come off the bridge. I asked her what she meant. She said they had crossed in the late afternoon the day before, single file, because there was a sign that said, one at a time, and the bridge was shaking with the water under it, and Maya was the third across, with Priya right behind her, and part way over, Maya had stopped. Just stopped, in the middle, with her hand on the rail, looking down at the river, and Priya had said, come on, keep going. The ankle was already hurting, and Maya had said, there's someone down there, and Priya had looked, and seen only black water moving fast, and had said, there's nobody, it's the water, keep going. And Maya had taken her hand off the upstream rail and leaned, the way you lean to see under something. And then Priya had looked away to find her own footing on a board that flexed, and when she looked back, Maya was not on the bridge, not in the water that Priya could see, not on the far side, just not on the bridge. Priya had screamed for the men, who were already across and a little ahead, and they had come back, and the three of them had stood on that bridge over that roaring water, and seen nothing, no Maya, no head in the current, nothing, and the water had been too fast and too cold and too dark to go into. And that was when Priya had turned her ankle scrambling down toward the bank to look, and could not climb back up, and the men had gone for help, and never made it out, or had not made it out yet. That is the story she told me, against a tree, 2 miles from the trailhead, beside a bridge over a dry ravine. I want to be fair to myself and say that nothing in that story, at that moment, required me to believe in an impossible river. A young woman had crossed a footbridge, suffered some kind of fall or medical event, and gone off the side into a ravine. That happens. The river was, To my mind that morning, a shared piece of confusion in a tired, dehydrated, traumatized group. Maybe they had crossed real water earlier in the loop and were misremembering which crossing was which. Maddox Creek runs full all summer, and the loop touches near it on the second day. People conflate things. The brain files crossings by feeling, not by map coordinate. So my objective shifted, cleanly and reasonably, from find the overdue party to we have a fall victim, search the ravine. I called it in to Sharon. Subject last seen on the Cedar Hollow footbridge. Possible fall into the ravine. Requesting more bodies and a technical team in case we needed rope to get down to her. Then I walked the last 50 yards to the bridge to look at where Maya Devereaux had gone over. The bridge was old. I want to give you the real thing, so you can stand on it with me. It was a timber footbridge, maybe 40 feet long, cedar decking on log stringers, with handrails on both sides, made of milled cedar, 2x6s, weathered gray. There was an inspection tag stapled to the near post, a little aluminum plate, and a load rating, and a hand-painted wooden sign on a stake at the near end that read, "One at a time on bridge," in faded letters. The deck boards were sound in most places, but two near the middle were soft, and one was cracked and would flex if you stepped on it wrong. There were galvanized bolts at the connections, most of them rusted at the heads. Standard old Forest Service footbridge, the kind there are dozens of in that country. It crossed a ravine about 15 feet deep, steep-sided, full of broken rock and old cedar duff. There was no water in it. There was no sign that there had ever been water in it that morning. No fresh mud, no wet rock, no smell of river. The bottom was dust. I went down into it, around the end of the bridge where the bank was less steep, and I stood under the planks and looked up, and I called Maya's name, and the ravine took my voice and gave nothing back. And then I saw the boot. It was wedged up between two of the deck boards from below, jammed in there, as if it had been driven up from underneath by force, toe first, the heel hanging down into the ravine. A woman's hiking boot, a good one, laced. I reached up and worked it loose, and it came free heavy, and when I turned it over, water ran out of it. Cold water, a cup of it, more. Cold enough that my hand ached holding the boot. It ran out and soaked into the dust at my feet, and the dust drank it, and in a minute there was nothing but a dark patch that was already going pale at the edges. I stood in the bottom of a dry ravine holding a soaked boot, with water running off my wrist, and I looked up at 40 feet of dry planks, over 15 feet of dust, and for the first time, the easy explanation did not fit the object in my hand. I bagged the boot. I did that right, at least. I logged it, photographed it in place first before I touched it. No, that is not true. I had already touched it. I had it in my hand before I thought of the camera, and I had to set it back roughly where it had been to photograph it, which I noted in the log, because you note things like that. Chain of custody matters, and I did not want anyone later saying I had been sloppy. I was sloppy with the boot's position. I was careful with everything else. When the rest of the team came in, including a tracker named Will Sorensen, who was the best sign cutter in the district, I had him work the bridge approaches. And here is the second thing that did not fit, and it is the one that started to turn me. Will read the ground from the lakeside, the side the party had come from. He found 4 sets of boot prints coming down the trail to the bridge. 4 people. They walked to the near end of the bridge, where the sign was, and the prints bunched up there the way prints do when people stop and wait their turn. Then the prints went onto the bridge in single file, and on a bridge you lose the track because it is wood. On the far side, the Cedar Hollow side, where the trail continued toward the trailhead, Will found prints leaving the bridge. He found 3 sets. 3 people walked off the far end and up the trail. We knew where those 3 were. 2 had gone for help. 1 was Priya against her tree. So 3 made sense. But 3 of the 4 sets of prints that came off the far side did not match the 4 sets that went on from the lakeside, in one particular. The mud. Will crouched over the far side prints for a long time, and then he called me over, and he showed me. The prints leaving the bridge had silt in them, pale fine silt, packed into the tread, the same silt I had seen around the welt of Priya's wet boots. It was in the tread of all 3 sets of departing prints. He scraped some out with a twig and rolled it between his fingers, and smelled it, and looked at me and said, "That's river silt. That's off a gravel bar." And then he stood up and looked back at the dry ravine, and did not say anything else, because there was nothing to say. There was no gravel bar. There was no river to make one. 4 people walked onto a dry bridge with dusty boots. 3 walked off the other side, with river silt packed in their tread. 1 did not walk off at all. That was Monday, before noon, day 2. My objective by then had quietly changed a 3rd time, though I did not announce it. It was no longer find the fall victim in the ravine, because the ravine was dry and empty, and there was no water in it for anyone to have fallen into. And a fall onto rock from 15 feet leaves a body, and there was no body, and no blood, and no disturbed duff. It had become, I do not understand what happened on this bridge, and I need to find out before I can find Maya. That is a dangerous objective for a search, because searches run on assumptions, and I had just lost mine. We carried Priya out. The 2 men, Daniel and Cole, turned up that same afternoon, but not the way you would expect. And that is the next thing I have to tell. A volunteer team working the lower trail toward Birch Landing found Daniel Reyes and Cole Whitaker about 4 miles from the bridge, on the wrong trail. Not the loop trail. They were on the old Maddox Creek spur, a decommissioned path that runs east toward the real creek, a trail we do not maintain, and that is not on the current map at all. They were both more or less able to walk, exhausted, scratched up, deeply confused about how they had gotten there. They had set off from the bridge, they said, heading for the trailhead to get help, a walk of under 2 miles on a clear trail they had hiked that morning. They had walked, by their own count, for most of a day, and they had come out 4 miles in the wrong direction on a trail neither of them remembered turning onto. I interviewed them separately, which is procedure, and which I am glad of, because if I had let them talk to each other first, I would always have wondered whether they had built a single story between them. Isolating witnesses is the only way to learn anything real, and what I learned was that their stories agreed where stories should not agree, and disagreed where they should not. Daniel Reyes was the planner. He had the laminated map. He had the permit. He was the one who knew the route cold. When I sat down with him, he had his map out, and he kept smoothing it with his hand. This engineer's gesture, like he was trying to flatten the part of the day that would not lie flat. He told me the crossing matched Priya's account in the bones of it. They had reached the bridge in late afternoon. There was a sign, one at a time. There was water under it, fast and high and black, loud enough that they had to raise their voices. He went first. He said the bridge bounced with the current, the way a bridge does over real flood, that he could feel it through his boots, and that he did not look down, because the sign and the shaking told him not to, and that he had a clear thought crossing it, which he repeated to me twice, that whoever built the bridge had built it big for a reason, that you do not build a 40-foot timber span over a trickle, and that the river under him was the river the bridge was for. I asked him how wide the river was. He thought about it and held his hands apart, maybe 20 feet, and said it filled the ravine bank to bank, fast, deep, with standing waves over the rocks. Cole, when I asked him the same thing in a different room, held his hands much wider, more like the ravine was 40 feet across, and described it as deep and smooth and almost slow, black glass moving fast underneath without breaking the surface. Priya, when the medics let me ask her, had described something narrower and shallower. White water, you could nearly have waded if it were not so cold and quick. 3 people, 1 crossing, 3 different rivers. That is the kind of contradiction that, in an ordinary search, tells you the witnesses are unreliable, and you discount all of them. And I understand why a careful incident commander would do exactly that. But I had a boot full of cold water, and silt in the tread, and a high water mark on a dry bridge, and the contradiction stopped looking like unreliability to me, and started looking like a clue. They were not misremembering one river. Each of them had seen a different one, and the bridge was the only thing they had in common. Daniel told me about Maya. He had been across and a little up the trail, looking back to count the others, over the way a leader does. He saw Maya stop in the middle. He saw her looking down. He said he called to her to keep moving, and she did not seem to hear over the water. And he saw her lean out over the upstream rail. And he saw, this is his word, he saw her step, not fall, not slip, He said she put one foot up onto the bottom rail like she was going to climb it, like there was something down there she meant to get to, and he started back toward her, and a board flexed under his own foot, and he looked down for half a second to catch his balance, and when he looked up, she was off the bridge. He said he never heard a splash. With all that water, all that noise, he never heard her go in. He said that was the part that he could not get past, lying in the timber that night, before they pushed on the wrong way, that a river that loud should have made some sound when it took her, and it made none. Cole Whitaker told me almost the same about Maya, except Cole had been looking through his camera. Cole photographed everything. It was a joke in the group. He had told Priya he would shoot the whole loop. He had turned at the near end of the bridge before crossing and taken a picture back along the line of them. Priya, then Maya, then himself last, with Daniel already across. And he had taken a picture of the river. He was certain of it. He remembered framing it, the black water and the old planks, thinking it would be the best shot of the trip, and then crossing, and the business with Maya, and the long, wrong walk after. I asked Cole if I could see the photographs. He still had the camera. It had been around his neck the whole time. He turned it on, and we went through the card together, and I watched his face do something I have seen on a few people over the years, and never gotten used to. He scrolled, and the pictures were all there. The high camp, the tarns, the black lakes, the trail through the cedar, all of it, right up to the near end of the bridge, where there was the picture of the line of them, with the sign in the foreground, one at a time on bridge, and the bridge running away behind them into shadow. And then the next picture. And the next picture was the far side of the bridge, the Cedar Hollow Trail, taken looking back at the span. Between the two, there was no picture of the river. There was no picture of the crossing. He scrolled back and forth, and the river photograph he was certain he had taken was not there, and the gap in the timestamps, when I made him check, was about 40 seconds. Long enough to cross, not long enough to do what he remembered doing. In the picture of the far side, looking back at the bridge, the ravine under the bridge is dry. You can see it. Dust and rock. The same dry ravine I stood in. He had photographed it himself, coming off, and not known. Cole sat there holding his camera and said, very quietly, "I shot the river. I know I shot the river." And I believed that he believed it. The camera did not. I want to mark where we are, because this is the end of the first phase, and the place where I had a clean chance to do the practical thing. And I took it, and it was wrong. By Monday evening, we had Priya safe, Daniel and Cole safe, and Maya missing. We had 3 witnesses describing a river that the map said did not exist, and the camera said did not exist, and the dry ravine said did not exist. We had wet evidence, a soaked boot, wet boots on a survivor, river silt in 3 sets of departing prints that the ravine could not account for. And we had a missing woman last seen, stepping toward water nobody could find. The practical thing, the defensible thing, was to set the river aside as witness contamination and searched the geography we could verify. And the nearest verifiable water was Maddox Creek, 3 miles east, the creek Daniel and Cole had somehow ended up walking toward. So the working theory that formed that evening, and that I did not fight as hard as I should have, was that the party had become disoriented in Cedar Hollow, that Maya had wandered off trail, possibly during some kind of group episode of exposure or shared panic, and gone east, and ended up in Maddox Creek, which runs fast and cold and could absolutely drown a person and carry her down. The wet evidence got folded into that. Maybe they had all been in Maddox Creek at some point. Maybe the silt came from there. Maybe the timeline was wrong, and they had crossed the real creek and only thought they had crossed the bridge. It is a coherent theory. I could defend it on a witness stand. It uses real water and real geography and a known mechanism of how people die in the woods. The only thing wrong with it is that it is not what happened, and I knew it was not what happened, because I had stood in the dry ravine and felt cold river water run out of a boot onto dust. Sharon Bell made the call to shift the search east toward Maddox Creek. I was in the room. I raised the wet evidence. I said the boot was soaked, and the prints had river silt, and the ravine was dry, and that did not fit a Maddox Creek drowning either, because if they crossed Maddox, you would expect the wet evidence on the way in, not packed into the prints, leaving a dry bridge 2 miles west. Sharon listened. She always listened. And then she said the thing that I have turned over 1,000 times since, which is that she could not run a search on evidence she could not explain, and that the only water on the map was Maddox, and that a missing person near water meant you search the water, and that if I had a better place to put the teams, that she could justify to the family and to the district, she would send them there. And I did not. That is the thing. I did not have a better place. I had a bridge over a dry ravine and a feeling. You cannot grid search a feeling. You cannot tell 40 volunteers to search the ravine that has nothing in it, because a boot was wet. So I said, all right. I agreed to shift east. And we spent the next 4 days searching Maddox Creek and its banks for Maya Devereaux, who was not there, while the bridge that had taken her stood 2 miles to the west with its dry ravine and its high water mark, waiting. That is my first real failure, and it is not a dramatic one. It is the failure of a practical man, choosing the searchable over the true. I want it understood plainly before I go on. During those 4 days on Maddox Creek, while the main effort went east, I kept finding reasons to go back to the bridge. I told Sharon I wanted to re-interview. I wanted to re-walk the loop. I wanted to check the upper trail in case Maya had backtracked. All of that was partly true. But mostly, I went back to stand on the bridge, because I had started to notice the thing that became, in the end, the whole of it. The first time I went back alone was Tuesday, the 3rd day, late afternoon, about the same time of day the party said they had crossed. I want to be careful here, because this is where a man's account stops being something he can prove and starts being something he can only swear to. I walked down the Cedar Hollow Trail from the lakeside, the way they had come. I was tired. I had been out 4 days. I was thinking about Maya and about the family and about the river that was not there. And I was, without meaning to be, walking the trail the way they had walked it, as a hiker at the end of a long day, coming to a bridge, expecting to cross. And about 100 feet from the near end, I heard water. Not loud. Not at first. A low, steady rushing sound. The sound of a creek over rocks, coming from ahead and below, from the ravine. I stopped. I knew, with the part of my mind that had stood in that dust, that there was no water there. But the sound was as plain as the sound of my own breathing. It got louder as I walked toward the bridge. By the time I reached the sign, one at a time on bridge, it was the full roar of a river, in flood, water against rock, the deep, continuous note of a lot of cold water moving fast in a confined channel. I could feel it, I thought, through the soles of my boots, a faint vibration in the planking. I made myself look down. The ravine was dry. Dust and rock, 15 feet down, not a drop of water in it, and the roar of a river coming up out of it, loud enough that if you closed your eyes, you would have backed away from the edge. I want to tell you what I did, because it is the closest I came to understanding the rule of the thing, and I did it by accident, standing at the near end, listening to a river I could not see. I did the practical thing my whole life had trained me to do, when my senses lied. I told myself, out loud, there is no river. This is a dry ravine. The bridge is just old wood over rock. I said it the way you reset a compass. And the sound began to fade, not all at once. It pulled back, the roar thinning to a rush, the rush thinning to a trickle, the trickle to nothing, until I was standing in the quiet of the cedars, with my pulse loud in my own ears, and the ravine dry and silent below me. I stood there a long time. Then, to test it, because I am the kind of man who tests things, I tried to bring it back. I closed my eyes, and I made myself believe, the way they must have believed at the end of a long day, that I was a tired hiker who needed to get across a river to get home, that the bridge was my way over the water, that the water was real and waiting, and I felt it start, a coolness on my face that had not been there, the first low note of the rushing, far down, like a sound coming up from underground. And the moment I felt it, I opened my eyes and stepped back off the approach and broke it, because I am not a brave man about that kind of thing, and because I had begun to understand what Maya had done. She had not disbelieved the river. She had believed it completely, and she had leaned out toward it, and it had been there for her, fully, the way it would not be there for anyone who stood on solid ground and told themselves the truth. That is the rule, as near as I ever got to it. And I am giving it to you now. though it took me much longer to put into words. The bridge does not cross a river. The bridge crosses what a crossing is supposed to cross. It completes the expectation. To a maintenance man checking bolts, it is old wood over a dry ravine, and the ravine stays dry. To a tired hiker at the end of 3 days, trusting a sign and a span to carry her over moving water, it is exactly that, a crossing over a river, deep and cold, and real enough to leave silt in your boots, and stain on the rail, and water that runs cold out of leather, hours later. The structure gives you the river it was built to imply, and it cannot keep its story straight from one person to the next, because it is not drawing on one real river. It is drawing on what each person expects a river there to be. That is why Daniel's was narrow and white, Cole's was wide and black, Priya's was something between. 3 expectations, 3 rivers, 1 bridge. I did not have all of that on the Tuesday. On the Tuesday I had a sound that came and went with my own belief, and the good sense to be frightened of it. I went back to the records next, because records were the ground I could stand on. This is where the archive work comes in, and I want to walk through it properly, because it is the part that turned my private fear into something with a paper spine. The district archive was kept then by a clerk named Ruth Hollis, a sharp, small woman near my own age, who had been filing the bones of that forest for 30 years, and knew where everything was, including the things that were supposed to have been thrown out. I went to Ruth, and I asked for everything on the Cedar Hollow footbridge: inspection records, the bridge inventory, the original construction file, any survey that touched it, any hydrology. The bridge had an inventory number, and Ruth found the inspection records first. Forest Service footbridges get inspected on a cycle, and someone walks out and checks the stringers and the deck and the rails and writes it up. The Cedar Hollow Bridge had a thin file of these going back decades. Most of them were routine. Deck boards replaced this year. Handrail bolt tightened that year. Recommend monitoring of soft tread near center. Ordinary maintenance on an old bridge. But scattered through the inspection records, every few years, was a note that had no business being there. The earliest one Ruth found was from a long time back, in an inspector's cramped hand, and it read, "High water damage to upstream abutment. Scour at base. Recommend riprap. High water damage. Scour." That is the word for when moving water digs out the base of a structure. Riprap is the rock you pile to stop it. An inspector had stood at that bridge and seen the marks of a river undercutting it, and written them down in an official record, and there was no river. It was not the only one. Every so often, irregularly, a different inspector, in a different decade, had written some version of the same thing. Flood debris lodged against upstream stringers. Removed. Handrail replaced. Prior unit lost to high water. High water mark noted 6 inches above deck. Recommend closure during runoff. That last one stopped me. because 6 inches above the deck was exactly the height of the stain on the railing fragment in my drawer. An inspector I never met, decades before Maya, had stood on that dry bridge and seen a high water mark in the same place I would later cut out and hide. And the most recent of those notes, before Maya's year, was perhaps the worst because of what was attached to it. It read, "Closed following flood event. See incident file." There was a reference number. I asked Ruth to pull the incident file. She looked at the number and went still, and then she went and looked, and she came back and told me the incident file did not exist. There was a number for it, a slot for it in the index, and the file itself was gone. Not misfiled, she checked, but gone, with a note in the index in someone's hand that said records transferred, and no record of where. Now, a missing file is not a ghost. Files get lost. Ruth was the first to say so. But she also told me, lowering her voice the way people do, even when there is no one to overhear, that she had pulled that same number once before, years earlier, for a different reason she would not name at first, and that it had been missing then too, and that she had reported it missing then, and that here it was missing again with a fresh note. Someone, more than once, across years, had taken the Cedar Hollow flood incident out of the record, and there had never been a flood, because there was never a river. I asked Ruth the obvious question. Why was the bridge built at all? 40 feet of timber. Span is expensive. You do not build it over a dry ravine. There has to have been a reason in the original file. The original construction file was the thinnest of all of them, and it answered the question and made it worse. The bridge had been built, according to the file, to replace an earlier crossing that had washed out. There was a survey sketch in the file, old, hand-drawn, that showed the trail coming down to the ravine, and across the ravine, drawn in the careful symbology of an old survey, a watercourse, a river. It had a name on the sketch, written in fading ink along the blue line. It was labeled as the Cedar Hollow crossing of a stream, the survey called the Hessian. The Hessian. I had never heard the name. I have worked that country my whole life, and I had never once heard of a river called the Hessian. And there it was, on a survey old enough that the ink had gone brown, a named river, running through the bottom of the ravine, that was, by every modern measure, bone dry, and had been dry within living memory. I asked Ruth to find the Hessian on the modern maps. She could not. It was not on any map printed in the last 60 years. I asked her to find when it came off the maps, and that took her 2 more days. And when she found it, she did not want to tell me, and then she did. The Hessian had not been removed in a normal map revision. It had been removed as part of the same nomenclature correction that took several other features off the Greywater maps in the same period. A cleanup, decades back, where the cartographers reconciled old surveys with new aerial work and struck features that the aerial work could not confirm. The aerial work could not confirm the Hessian because, by the time the planes flew, There was no river in the ravine to photograph, so a man at a drafting table, looking at a clean, dry ravine in an aerial photo and an old survey that claimed a river, did the practical thing. He struck the river. He corrected the map to match the ground. And the bridge, which the file still listed under maintenance, became a bridge over nothing, too expensive to remove, left standing, its inspection tags quietly accumulating impossible flood damage every few years, like a clock no one was reading. I sat with that a long while. A river had been on the maps, and had a name, and had a bridge built for it, and had then, what? Dried up, gone underground, stopped being there in the way that rivers are there, and the map had been corrected to say it had never existed, because a man with an aerial photo had no way to file a river he could not see, the same way I would later have no way to file a boot full of water from a dry ravine. We had both done the same thing, that draftsman and I, across decades. We had both struck the thing we could not document and signed the version we could defend. The bridge was the only honest record left, and it kept its account in high water stains and scoured abutments that no one would believe. I want to bring it back to the search, because all this archive work was happening while teams were still combing Maddox Creek for a living woman, and I had a duty there I was failing. By Thursday, day 5, the Maddox Creek search had turned up nothing. No Maya, no sign of Maya, no scent for the dog teams to hold. Nothing. A 5-day search with the resources we had put on it should have found something of a person who drowned in a creek 3 miles long. The dogs would not take a line east of the bridge at all. They worked the creek banks willingly enough, but any time a handler brought a dog toward the Cedar Hollow draw, the dogs lost interest, circled, sat. I will not make more of that than it is. Dogs do strange things, but the absence on Maddox was total, and absence is its own kind of evidence, and it was eating at the working theory. There was family pressure by then, which is the hardest part of any search, and the part the public never sees. Carol Devereaux, Maya's mother, had come up and was staying in a motel down in the valley town and driving up to the command post every morning. She was not hysterical. She was worse than hysterical. She was patient and exact, and she asked good questions, and the good questions had no answers. On the Thursday, she asked me directly, having figured out that I was the one who had found Priya and the boot. She asked me, where did the water in my daughter's boot come from? I did not lie to her, but I did not tell her the truth either, because the truth was a sound that came and went with belief, and a river struck off a map. I told her we were still working to understand the wet evidence. She looked at me with Maya's eyes. I had seen Maya's face by then, in the photos the family provided, and the mother had the same eyes. And she said, "You found a soaked boot under a dry bridge and you're searching a creek 3 miles away. Why aren't you searching the bridge?" And I did not have a defensible answer, because she was right. And the only reason we were not searching the bridge was that there was nothing there to search, an empty dry ravine, and you cannot grid an empty ravine forever while a creek sits unsearched with real water in it. I told her some version of that. She listened the way her daughter had listened to Priya say, "There's nobody down there," and then she said, "She's at the bridge. Wherever she is, she's at the bridge. You all know it, and you're searching where it's easy." That was the second time someone said the easy thing to my face, and the second time it was true. I went to Sharon that afternoon, and I made the case again, harder this time, with the archive behind me. I laid out the inspection records with their impossible flood notes. I laid out the Struck River, the Hessian, the named watercourse the bridge had been built for. I laid out the missing incident file. I told her I did not understand the mechanism, but that every piece of paper in the district agreed that there had been a river there, that the bridge was built for it, that water damage kept appearing at the bridge, and that the wet evidence on Maya and the others was consistent with that, and consistent with nothing else. Sharon heard me out. And then she said the thing that ended the active search. And I want to give her words as near as I can, because they were not foolish. They were the words of an honest professional, at the edge of what she could justify. She said, "A river that was on a map 60 years ago, and isn't there now, doesn't drown a hiker last Sunday. You're giving me history, not water. I can't keep 40 people in the field on history. If there's no water in that ravine, there's no body in that ravine. And if there's no body in that ravine, the most likely thing is still that she went east toward the only water for 3 miles. We've searched that water and found nothing, which means either she's deep, or she's somewhere we haven't reached, or she walked out and we'll get a phone call. I'm going to scale this back. I have to. And when I write it up, I'm going to write what I can defend, which is misnavigation near Maddox Creek. I am not going to write that a bridge crossed a river that isn't there, because the first person who reads it will pull me off this district and put someone on it who'll get the next family a real answer. I understood every word of it. That is the part that has never let me go. I understood her completely. If our positions had been reversed, I might have said the same. She was not covering anything up in any sinister way. She was choosing the explanation she could stand behind, out of a kind of professional mercy as much as anything. A defensible lie that let the family grieve a recognizable death by water, instead of an indefensible truth that would have told a mother her daughter walked off a bridge into a river that no one else could find. Which of those would you give a mother? I have asked myself that for years, and I still do not have a clean answer. The search was scaled back Friday and suspended the following week. Maya Devereaux was never found. The official finding was misnavigation and probable drowning in Maddox Creek. Last known point shifted on the paperwork from the Cedar Hollow Bridge to a point on the creek where she was never seen by anyone, because the bridge could not be reconciled with the hydrology. The wet evidence was logged as inconclusive. The boot's water content consistent with immersion in Maddox Creek prior to the subject becoming separated, which is a sentence that means nothing if you think about it, because she became separated on the bridge, miles from the creek, but it is a sentence that can sit in a file without raising a flag. Cole's missing photograph was not mentioned. Priya's wet boots were not mentioned. The river silt in 3 sets of departing prints was summarized as trail conditions. The 3 survivors' accounts of crossing a river were folded into a paragraph on dehydration and the unreliability of stress-affected memory. And the railing fragment with the high water mark I took out before it was logged. I did that deliberately, with my own hands, the day before the evidence inventory closed. I told myself I was preserving it, that the boot would go into the official file and dry out and become nothing, that the prints would be rained on and erased, that the survivors' memories would be talked out of them by their own good sense within a year, and that this one piece of cedar, with the stain on it, was the only thing that would still be true in 10 years, and that someone ought to keep one true thing. That is what I told myself. There is another reading, which is that I took it, because if it stayed in the file, someone might one day ask me to explain it, and I could not. And a man does not like to keep evidence he cannot explain, where it can be used against his judgment. Both readings are true. I have stopped trying to decide which is more true. So that is how the case closed. A defensible lie. A grieving mother sent to the wrong water. A soaked boot filed as inconclusive, and a strip of stained railing in my drawer. For a long time I let it stay closed. I retired not long after. The years went on the way years do. I want to tell you about the in-between time, briefly, because 2 things happened in it that belong in this record, and then I will come to why I am speaking now. The first was a conversation, maybe 3 years after, with a man named Earl Breivik, who plowed the county road that runs along the south edge of the forest, and had done it for 40 winters. I knew Earl a little. We got to talking one time at the gas station in the valley town, and he asked what I had worked on, the way men our age do, and I mentioned, without saying much, a search up in Cedar Hollow, and Earl got a look and said, "By the old bridge." I said yes, and Earl said something I have never forgotten. He said that for years, plowing that road on still winter nights, he had heard running water off in the trees, up the Cedar Hollow draw. A river, he said. Big water. You could hear it over the plow with the window down. And it had bothered him, because he knew there was no river up there. He had hunted that country as a boy. It was a dry draw. He said he had asked around once, years back, and an old-timer had told him there used to be a river up there called the Hessian, that it had gone underground in some dry decade and never come back up, and that on certain nights you could still hear it running where it used to run. Earl told me this, the way a practical man tells you a thing he does not believe, but cannot shake. And then he said the part that put a cold weight in me. He said, "I don't hear it as much anymore." But the winter your search was, I heard it every night, loudest I ever heard it, like it was up, like it was up, like the river was running. The same season Maya crossed it. The second thing was that I went back, once, alone, a few years after I retired. I am not proud of it, and I am not going to dress it up. I drove out, and I walked down the Cedar Hollow Trail in the late afternoon, the same time of day, and I will tell you honestly that I went there half meaning to do what Maya did. I do not mean I went to die. I mean I went carrying her with me, and her mother's eyes, and the file I had signed, and I wanted, in some way I am ashamed of, to hear the river one more time, and to understand what she understood at the end. I walked down to the sign, one at a time on bridge, more faded than before, and I let myself believe it, the way I had taught myself I could, and the river came up, the cool on my face, the low note rising, the roar building, until the dry ravine was full of the sound of cold water. I stood at the near end, with my hand on the post, and I looked down into the dust and heard the flood, and I understood that all I had to do was keep believing and step onto the deck and walk out to the middle and look down, and there would be water there, real water, real enough to take me, and somewhere in it, maybe, the thing she leaned toward. And I am still here, so you know what I did. I said the words. There is no river. It is a dry ravine. It is old wood over rock. And I said them, and I kept saying them, and the sound pulled back and thinned and died, and I stood in the quiet cedars, and I was an old man, alone at a bridge, and I turned around and walked out, and did not go back. I did not solve anything. I did not save anyone. I just refused the river, which is the one thing Maya did not do, and I have never decided whether that makes me wiser than her or only more afraid. Now I will tell you why I am speaking, because everything until now is old grief, and a man could keep old grief in a drawer forever. What I cannot keep is the new thing. 2 months ago, the trail report came across, forwarded by the man who still works the district. A routine seasonal trail status update for the eastern section, and in it, the Cedar Hollow Footbridge is listed as closed flood damage, with a current date, this year. Closed due to flood damage. I read it 3 times. There has been no flood. There is no river. The ravine is dry. I would stake my life it is dry. The Hessian has been struck off the maps for 60 years and has no business running. And someone this year walked out to that bridge, or read a report from someone who did, and found flood damage, and closed it, the same way an inspector, decades before Maya, found scour at the abutment and recommended riprap. The bridge is filing its account again, in the only language it has, in high water and flood damage, every few years, like a clock, and someone is finally reading it again. That is bad enough, but I made the man who forwarded it go out and photograph the bridge for me, because I had to know, and he did, and he sent the pictures, and that is what finally put me at this table to record this. The photographs show the bridge closed with tape. They show a new sign the district put up. A printed closure sign. No entry. Unsafe crossing. And below the printed sign, nailed to the same post, someone has put up a second sign. A wooden one. Hand-painted. Weathered as if it had been there for years, though the man swears it was not there last season. It reads, "One at a time on bridge." The original sign, the one from Maya's crossing, the one I last saw faded almost to nothing. It is fresh again. The paint is bright, as if it had just been made, as if the bridge had repainted its own rule for whoever comes next. And there is one more photograph, and it is the one I look at and then have to put away. It is taken from the near end, looking across and down, the way you would look to check the ravine, and under the bridge, in that photograph, where I have stood in the dust and felt it come up around my boots like flour, there is water, black water, filling the ravine bank to bank, the surface broken into the standing waves of a fast, cold river over rock. You can see foam at the upstream abutment, lodged against the scour. You can see, if you look, the gleam of it on the underside of the planks. The man who took the picture did not see any water when he stood there. He swears the ravine was dry, dust-dry, and that he closed the tape and left, and never heard a thing. He photographed a river he could not see, the same way Cole Whitaker once photographed a dry ravine he could not see. The bridge gave the camera what the bridge gives. And I sit here, and I cannot tell whether the river is finally coming back up, the Hessian rising in its old bed, after 60 years, the way Earl heard it, the winter Maya crossed, or whether the bridge has simply found someone new to expect a crossing, someone tired enough, someone trusting enough, and is completing them the way it completed her. I have the railing fragment here on the desk beside the photographs. I cut it from that bridge with my own hand, and I have kept it in this drawer for all these years. And the band of high water stain on it has always sat exactly 6 inches up, fixed, a dead mark on dead wood. I took it out tonight to look at it while I talked, and I want to tell you the last true thing, and then I am going to stop, because I do not think I can hold the rest of it steady enough to say. There is a second line on the cedar now, faint above the old one, a new band, paler, just starting to take the wood, the way a stain comes up slow when water has been sitting against grain. It is higher than the old mark. The current is higher than last night, one of them said on the bridge, all those years ago, and I thought it was nothing. And now there is a new water line rising on a piece of dead railing in a closed drawer in a dry house, and I have not been near a river. I keep the drawer shut. I keep telling myself, the way I taught myself at the bridge, the only words that ever worked, that there is no river, that it is old wood, that the dead do not come back up out of the ground any more than struck rivers do. I say it the way you reset a compass. Most nights it holds. But the house is quiet now that it is late, and a little while ago, under the words, under the quiet, I could hear it, low, steady, coming up from somewhere below the floor, the sound of a lot of cold water moving fast in a narrow place, and I have not yet been able to make it stop.